Greetings. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about using RME TotalMix FX to do a slightly more advanced means of live stream capture for audio. Could be for video conferencing, whether that's Google Meet or WebEx or Zoom or whatever. I end up using all of them for work. I will also say, apologize for the background noise. I mean, I've talked about it before. I've got a 42U server rack behind me, which makes a lot of noise, and unfortunately there's not a whole lot I can do about that. I will try to filter some of it out in post, but make no guarantees on how much or how well that'll work. So with TotalMix, I happen to be using this with a Digiface Dante, which is RME's device for basically connecting Dante networks into a computer. This will work with any of their products, however, whether it's a Babyface or a Mattyface or a Fireface, it doesn't matter. It's kind of one of the nice things about the TotalMix solution from RME is it's the same across their entire product line. In my case, I happen to be using a Focusrite RedNet X2P as the input and output for Dante, so you can see that down here. And one thing that's nice about the Focusrite, and this is not unique to them, I would classify a lot of this product along the lines of the, personal recorder mixer for somebody in a band, right? So they can you've got two lines in, which in my case, I'm using the Rodecaster as a vocal processor for my microphones, and then that's feeding into the X2P, and then I have headphones out from the X2P, and there's this knob here which is mix for zero latency monitoring of what's coming from the Rodecaster, and then also mixing what's coming back from the computer over Dante. But again, you don't have to do that if you were using something like a Babyface. You have a direct mic input on the Babyface, you have direct headphone out on the Babyface, and it works just fine. And in the simplest case, you would just go into whatever your conferencing is, and you'd say microphone is whatever your microphone input, and speakers are whatever your speaker are, and boom, right? You're done, and you don't really have to worry about mix minus or anything like that because it's very simple configuration. But what we want to do here is something a little bit more advanced, right? So what I've got set up, and there's a little bit of head scratching to this, because the way TotalMix labels things in channels is maybe, like the stuff coming from the computer gets named as the same as the inputs, so you think that they're actually hard tied to the inputs, but they're really not. It's actually very flexible. Anything can basically go to anything. And if you've never seen TotalMix before, when you first open it, it usually looks like this. But I actually think that the 2-row version, well, actually, it would also look like this, where it has all the channels and scroll forever, right? I have set up a custom layout so that only the channels that are actually in use in this are shown. And then by using the 2-row mode, it's actually, I think, a little bit more intuitive and also uses a lot less screen real estate. This rack of inputs over here are hardware inputs. Now, in my case, that means Dante channels. And in the case of a Babyface, that would be your actual XLRs, it would be ADAT interfaces, etc., right? Second rack of inputs is virtual inputs that the computer sends to, right? So when you tell Meet to send to the RME, it's going to come in on one of these. And then down here are your outputs, and then over in the main, this control room section, you have your main out, which on the Digiface happens to be a headphone out that I don't use because the Digiface is sitting down behind the desk and out of the way, and I use the headphone output on the X2P, which is actually a really nice headphone output. It's very quiet, even when using things like these really sensitive in-ear monitors. So we're going to mostly ignore the main channel because don't use it. But what we need for video conferencing, for live streaming, whatever, recording podcasts, is we need the concept of what's going into the conferencing app and what the conferencing app is sending out, right? And I've got that represented as two output channels down here. And the output from the computer is the easy bit, right? So we'll start with that, right? We have this last column that's labeled the X2P out is the channel that I have Google Meet set to, for example. So if I was to come in here and play a test tone, you can see that it had activity on that last channel. And it was also sending to this output channel here in TotalMix. And the way that works in TotalMix is when you select a channel, you can then, for any of the inputs, whether they're the hardware inputs or they are the inputs, the virtual inputs from the computer, you can dial them up or down. And out of the box, they basically have a one-to-one mapping set up for everything. Now, what I wanted to be able to do was to feed in sounds from other applications running on the computer and be able to have a couple of channels for that. So I have 4, as you can see, they're called comp merge 1, 2, 3, and 4. These they show up as a local interface. So here, for example, I've got Audacity with just a generated rhythm track as an example. If I click play, you can hear it clicking away, and you can see that it's coming in on that comp merge 1. And at the same time, I've got VNC. If I go to audio device, you can see it's on Dante 55 and 6, which if I click play here, you can see it's coming in on that next comp merge track, right? And I'll stop this one as well. Likewise, in addition, and so basically this record mix in is subscribed to all of these 4 channels, right? And I actually have 2 snapshots. I have one where I'm merging everything, and then I can also do this where I'm merging nothing, and all I get is the X2P in and out, right? The magic, well, the other thing I'll say is, like, for example, if you're in Google Meet, and Google Meet's not the only app that does this, like if I choose a different output, it complains, hey, you're using a different device for the in and the out. It really wants, for the end user, it wants you to have the same device as both the input and output. Doesn't really make a difference per se, but it's something that, it squawks about if you don't have it set for the same input and output. So if I click on names over here, it's going to shift and change to display the actual names of the inputs. You can see this is Dante 6364. And if I click the wrench here, I've got it in loopback mode. And so what loopback mode does, and this is kind of the magic that makes TotalMix work for this, is it takes all of these inputs, and in addition to actually sending it out, that output, it actually loops it back virtually to the input of 63 and 64, which I don't actually have here because I don't actually need to control that. But I'm telling the computer to record from that, right? So if we look in the settings for Google Meet, you can see that it's got channel 63 and 64 as the mic input, and you can see it's bouncing around as I'm talking here, right? And if I go back over here, right, 63, 64 is also the output that it has configured in Meet, right? So you can see that's over here, 63, 64. And because this channel is the channel where I'm bringing stuff in from the mic, I've got that dialed down to 0, but when I'm doing merge, I obviously want to be able to hear the whatever it is I'm playing, and I also want whatever it is I'm playing to get recorded and sent back out to the end, the video stream, the conferencing stream, right? So the mix in here basically includes all of the merges. It includes the mic coming from the X2P, and it includes all of the 4 virtual channels that I've set up on the computer for sending to direct as well, right? And then on the out to the X2P, here we want a mix minus configuration. I am already listening to myself via the mix dial on the X2P, and you could also set this up within RME, you know, the TotalMix if you were using a babyface or whatever, right? But in my case, I don't need the microphone to come back in to what's being sent to my headphones, because it's actually being done locally, 0 latency in the X2P. So you can see when I'm talking that the input channel is there, but the contribution is set to 0, and we're not sending anything out over here. But when I click play on this audio, which is coming in here, it does go out, and I can hear it in my headphones. And then with the Dante inputs, the merge inputs from here, I can also do the same thing. So like in Dante controller here, you can see that I have the Mac set to send its channels 1 and 2, because on Mac is actually a lot less flexible in this regard, unless you have software that, you know, knows how to explicitly target specific outputs on a core audio device. It just defaults to 1 and 2, and yeah, you can go in and change it so it was 4 and 5, but you're still changing it holistically for the whole system. Whereas with Windows, I can actually, in the RME config tool, I can say what channels I want to show up, and it basically makes a separate virtual sound card entry that Windows sees. So I can do things like have Audacity pointing to 53, 54, and having VNC pointing to 55, 56, and it's really easy to send to different channels. But again, if I play from Audacity, so on the Mac I have just a one-shot sound. You can see that that came in on the merge in 1 from Dante, and it was heard both in my headphones and in what got sent to the recording, because that channel includes it. And excuse me. This is actually, you know, a really flexible setup, because it allows you to, you know, put YouTube in a separate channel, or put, you know, if you're playing a presentation or something on a conference or whatever, you can have the presentation audio go to a dedicated channel, which you could then, if need be, you can mix up and down relative volume wise and so forth. And so it's a really handy thing to have a few of these extra channels where, you know, because typically your video conferencing software does not allow you to pick multiple audio inputs and outputs and have it mixed together. I mean, you could do something with OBS and have OBS record multiple channels, but, you know, this is real simple, and it's not load on the computer. You don't actually need to have OBS running. And with the RME stuff, this is all being done in the interface hardware itself. They have FPGA there. Also on some of them, like the Babyface, they have a DSP. The Digiface does not have it. So like if I look at the inputs on the advanced settings for an input on the Digiface, all I have is, stereo width, whether it's treated as a stereo channel or mono channel, mono mid-split processing, and you can invert phase for left and right. But there's no EQ in here. There's no dynamics in here. With some of the RME gear like the Babyface and the Fireface and whatnot, they do also have onboard DSP, so that gives you zero latency EQ, zero latency compression, and for doing video conferencing stuff, that's probably all the processing you need. Like I say, in my case, I'm getting that processing done by the Rodecaster, and then the Rodecaster's main outs are feeding into the X2P, and then that's what comes in over Dante to the computer. Some people might ask, well, why don't you just use the Rodecaster entirely? Well, again, the Rodecaster only gives you one USB send, and doesn't really make it easy to loop back multiple channels into the recording. The other problem that I have with the Rodecaster is that the headphone outputs, the Rodecaster is like 95% there. It's really good. The preamps are really pretty good. The master out's really pretty good. If I stop speaking, it's basically dead quiet. It got down to like negative 87, right? You're not going to hear anything. But the headphone outputs on the Rodecaster are extremely noisy, to the extent that I actually consider it to be unusable, especially using highly sensitive in-ear monitors. It's just super fatiguing, and you can't do it for very long without just ripping your ears out and taking a break, because it's just so the headphone amps on and I'm not the only one that said this. Plenty of people, reviews and whatnot, all will concur that the headphone amps on the Rodecaster are like the one lame duck for the whole product, right? The rest of it's actually really nice, and I really like the machine, and I do quite a bit with it, but I can't use its headphone outs, which is another reason why I like the X2P, is because its headphone output is really good, and I can do the mix to get zero latency monitoring of what I'm saying and whatnot, and then I can have the audio coming back from the computer for the other side of the video conferencing call or Skype or whatever it is that I happen to be doing. And like I say, I can mix all these channels and have them go to the mix in, which through the magic of setting it as a loopback allows me to make that channel be seen by the computer as a mixed channel with all these inputs. And then likewise, I can send out to this channel, and this hardware output, which is mapped to a different Dante channel, you can see it's 61, 62, right? Will send out through the mapping that I have in Dante controller, right? So here you can see I've actually labeled it to Rodecaster left and right, right? And here's the X2P for the Rodecaster. You can see the left and right channels have been assigned. Same, here's the Rodecaster coming in on 63 and 64. And then here is the Mac as an example for an outside Dante source coming in on that merge 1 and 2, right? And it just works really well. It's a little unintuitive because of the loopback. It's a little unintuitive because in the computer, I've made it look like 63 and 64 are both the input and the output, but what actually goes out over Dante, it comes in on 63, 64, but it goes out on 61, 62. But, that's, again, you could have that output here instead of being 61, 62 Dante could be the phono output on a Babyface or a RME, on a Fireface or whatever. So I hope that was useful, not too much rambling. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. Thanks. Cheers.